So Trends in the Field, this is part of a larger project financed by Erasmus+. I should have mentioned the full header, the information about that. It's called SIT for VET, and that stands for Catalog of Intercultural Tools for Vocational and Educational Trainings. So this is for people who are somehow involved in trainings and who more and more see that diversity, cultural, whatever diversity, affects their ability to deliver effective trainings. So it's a catalog that's open online resource material. You will see the link afterwards. We also welcome your feedback. If you're interested, let me know. More than 100 links to intercultural tools. There is background material, introduction to culture, stuff like that. And my job was to somehow fantasize a bit about trends. And you see here a picture by Professor Gerd Gigerenzer, and I refer to him because of his law of indispensable ignorance. So how can we possibly speculate about trends? The world cannot function without partially ignorant people. So that's the basic from which I come. How did we gather the information? First, discussions with clients and colleagues. Then we looked at trends using various resources. And then also, of course, academic publications, practitioner publications, and so forth. And we identified 4 trends. The first one is, I'm going to go to the overview. So we have from cross-border business interactions to interactions within culturally diverse societies. And it's almost movement from outside in. So culture, these rings around us that influence us. First, they were far away, and they're coming closer and closer, not just in terms of people mixing our societies, but also more in terms of how we learn to see ourselves as complex cultural beings. Then in terms of trainings, we see more and more that standalone trainings on intercultural competence, whatever, are less in demand. We need to bring them in as part of a more complex package of what organizations need anyhow. A third trend is that differences used to be seen as obstacles, cultural differences. Now they are celebrated as an opportunity. Then a big trend, and I also saw this mentioned in the infographic that I just saw, that culture meets psychology and psychology meets culture. At the end, I'll also have a couple of upcoming developments because, you know, whatever is written on paper is already kind of like lagging behind. Anyway, mostly my presentation is about pictures. I love to work with pictures and I love to work with street art. So from cross-border business interactions to culturally diverse societies. So it is so fantastic that we can, you know, license to say that globalization started with the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's just so cute to have a concrete date. And then we had these merger waves and the OECD, you have publications on those waves, etc. We've all been there. And then, of course, coincidentally, just in time, Hofstede and Trompenaars had their key publications. So this all kind of like it was just out there for the taking, thinking about culture in terms of nationality. Out there, others have a culture and we need trainers to tell us what those cultures are. Then the interest shifted first, and of course, many of you have worked with this for years already, from cultural models to intercultural competencies, and from there to from intercultural to diversity. And you see one graph here that I produced from publications in manager seminare, one of these training or manager journals in Germany, and they have a website where I could do this little research, looking for words that they are using in the publications from 2004 to 2018. And you see the red line is Diversität, diversity, and the black line is Intercultural. And you see this trend that clearly, with some ups and downs, still diversity is in the upwards trend. So much for this, and I'm sure that you all know this trend, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Let's go to the next trend, from standalone trainings to complex packages. What we've seen is that 20 years ago, the interesting culture started high in the organizational hierarchy. So we were invited to strategy meetings and to leadership trainings and whatever, and it was really up there in this hierarchy of learning and development. And we've seen that if you're not fixing it to some other topics like leadership and teams, you're kind of like just sliding down this training hierarchy, and you're ending up with non-managerial participants, and so less and less in positions where you can have an impact. So that is something that trainers need to be aware of, that they need to think about, how do I want to position myself? What else do I need to be able to do in order to provide effective interventions? Okay, then from differences as obstacles to diversity as opportunities, it's even more awesome now. And if one trend is really kind of like, you can really support this with data, then it's this one. These are really just the basics of the data that I found. There is big analysis by Günther Stahl and Rosalind Tung from 2015. They looked through more than 1,000 articles in the Journal of International Business Studies, found 244 which dealt with culture. This is an abbreviation, but more or less they found roughly 70% of all those publications were concerned about culture having a negative impact on business. About 20–25% said, well, it's going to be mixed, and only 4–5% of them expected or described a positive impact on culture. So this is, of course, also the mindset of the leaders of the organizations with whom we will be talking, that they may expect the message we are bringing to be negative. And of course, you know, if we can sell ourselves by saying, oh, you have a problem and I can solve it, that's, you know, it's also, we may also be careful, need to be careful in terms of how we, you know, sort of present the topic. Stahl et al. And Adler and Icahn shortly afterwards, all of them had publications. Let's start looking at the bright side of culture. And then you have now, of course, and you all know this, magazines like HBR and Forbes, etc. They just sing the praise of diversity. And then you have, I checked the websites of 10 of Europe's largest companies. They all commit to diversity and inclusion. And, you know, so these are trends. And I just said, you know, whatever is written is already outdated. Like Ruchir Sharma in his breakout Nation says, you know, journalists describe the present, stockbrokers predict the future. So this is, I think that stockbrokers now would say cultural diversity, it's a nuisance. We're fed up with it. So that's my take on that. Of course, I think that I have some ideas about how to turn that trend, but we're going to come to that. So this is kind of like the written stuff. Now, culture meets psychology and psychology meets culture. I will only really have some highlights. This is hugely complex. These are, I mean, and I don't really understand all of it. Just some highlights. There is Jürgen Bolton's approach to culture in terms of new thinking, new ways of thinking about how culture influences us. I'm a psychologist by training. I see a lot of social identity theory in that. So I see that he kind of like comes close to psychology there. Then also unconscious bias. To be honest, that's a trend I completely slept over because it just couldn't excite me. You know, that was something I had when I studied psychology, and I thought, okay. And then everybody was starting to kind of like sell programs, and I got late as always. Anyway, cultural psychology, cultural neuroscience, that's the big stuff, very complex. And here my message only is that we need to be very careful in terms of, do we understand the methods that are being used with neuroscience? They are highly complex, neuroimaging, magnetic resonance, you name it. This is highly complex material. It's very easy to find some effects between Chinese and Americans, etc. But it doesn't mean that the experts in those methods would actually agree with that. Okay, psychology meets culture. What you see here is from the psychologists already from years movement saying we need to become aware of our own biases. We need to look at who are our subjects in our experiments. There is this fantastic publication. If you Google weird people, you'll find it, that I think 98% of all psychological experiments are kind of like highly educated, wealthy, white students. And then also in cross-cultural psychology, rigorous reflection on how our methods actually may only be working for certain groups, and also that we are leaving out certain topics like inequality, for example. And then there is empirical research now, and that's where my hope comes in also, on what do we know about how this training can be made effective. Okay, almost there. Of course, changing trends, Black Lives Matter. The question here is, how does it affect Europe, where the discussion around race is, of course, very different from the US. I believe that institutional racism will now also we will be able to address it. My hopes, that the strengths will lie in professional associations, as Timothy Snyder says in one of his guidelines for preventing fighting against authoritarian developments, to focus on the strengths of your professional associations, quality standards for the intercultural profession. And I hope that, if you are in the commission who decides about this project, that you will kind of like let this pass the second time now. We have applied for the second time for funding to create standards for the intercultural profession. We call it ESILP, the European Certificate for Intercultural Learning Professionals. We need to have independent commissions who decide how we should do our work. Not everybody should be allowed to call themselves intercultural trainer. Again, empirical research on what works, what doesn't. I think there is a lot that we haven't touched base on yet. And I would say value-based leadership, taking into account sustainability issues. Fears, and here the fears is it was all a dream. Responses of, there is the new narrative around superiority. These thoughts coming through the back door in response to migration, in populism, in this unhealthy combination with fake news, discreditation of science and social media, kind of like blasting all this crap into the world. There is simplified cultural thinking. I'm not going to mention any names. And then there are claims about deeply wired cognitive differences based on DNA research in anthropology and neuroscientific research, which my personal opinion is are very fashionable, but still not well understood. So this is where we have to pay attention to. Be careful. That was it. Yes, this is the project. Please go to the website, like us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter. Get in touch with me for feedback. We need now feedback raters. We have until the end of July. These are the partners: Assist International HR, the key partners, Nove, Educator, Rooney Center, IBI, my company, Dunmore Computers, and in the Institute of Technology for Tralee. And thanks to all of them for having been great teams here. That was it. Thank you very much.